Welcome to this episode of the Strong Kind Podcast. This episode is with Alex Sterner. Me and Alex got into a lot of topics on this podcast, from injury management and stress management to why people think that they can be fixed. We also talked about BJJ, strength and conditioning. We covered a lot of ground. It was a really great conversation with Alex. He's a very good communicator, understands nuance, has fun with the social media aspect of stuff while still trying to convey really good information. So really had a lot of fun talking to him. You can find him at alex.sterner on Instagram. His gym is Electrum Performance in San Diego. And really had a really fun time with Alex. I'm grateful for him coming on. Thanks for being here. Before we get into this episode, if you're interested in working with Strength and Kindness Coaching for performance and rehab, please shoot me a message on Instagram to help solve your pain and injury needs. Peace. All right. Mr. Sterner, Alex Sterner. Okay, I'm just gonna preface like why I wanted to talk to you is you are a strength and conditioning specialist. You do BJJ as well. Like are you a black belt?
Yes, sir.
Okay, like super cool. Uh I want to ask you about some BJJ stuff in a little bit here. But
Okay.
the thing I appreciate about your Instagram content is a combination of like nuance and slight amounts of you just want to like start a discussion. Even your post yesterday about, warm-up sets do not improve lifting performance. Like, instead of just being like this is stupid, you're like, well, let's talk about it a little bit. Where do you think that curiosity frame like comes for you, or what's that about for you when it comes to like your Instagram and your like your social media like style, I guess.
Yeah. I think it's pretty cool to be like a walking dichotomy, where
Mhm.
like, sometimes I'm a total meathead, right? I'm sure if you've also seen some of my other posts, like, maxing out like a lift with my neck or something like that. Like I am a meathead. There is, there's a method to it. I'm not just being reckless, right? But there is that like I love this stuff, right?
Mhm.
But then on the other side, I'm also really curious, and I do like to dive into research, read about those controlled settings, see how those variables change, etc. But I also think if we zoom out a little bit, which a lot of people in this field struggle to do, we see that exercise science as a science is, man, I don't know how to say this nicely, is like a little lacking, right? There's a lot of blind spots. There are a lot of studies conducted that have these like gross limitations, and yet sometimes they're still held up as gospel. So I think it's important sometimes to just sort of let's wear that limitation a little bit. Let's talk about the fact that okay, we gathered some info here, but it might not be the best to extrapolate at large.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, I think there is a lot of nuance. I think there's a lot of great minds in this field, despite some of those shortcomings that I discussed, right? And despite sometimes the superficial nature. And over the years, I've been able to network with a lot of those great minds, and getting that input, I think, is valuable, right? So yeah, and plus. I think something that's important for content creation is to really focus on the things that do interest you. And sometimes I
Yeah.
just want to hear what people have to say, you know?
Yeah.
So sometimes drumming that up is good. And also with somebody, that post was based on Menno. Like I said in the post, I do think he's a net positive. I think there are a lot of good things he brings to the table. He gets a lot of eyes on studies and research, even if sometimes a lot of those comments are negative or people saying that he's creating clickbait, etc. So yeah, I think it's worth talking about. And if nothing else, I created another post where a bunch of people are discussing a study. They're talking about the implications of that study or lack thereof. Um, yeah, I think it's a cool discussion. It's fun to talk about.
I think one of the things that, and like we can get into social media more and more, and I like part of it is just you got to be willing to put yourself out to the world. If you want to grow a business, like the days of putting up a sign and saying I'm open like are gone, right? Like unless you got some super special thing, like it's not going to work. And that's what a lot of people unfortunately do. They get a strength and conditioning certification, they start a gym, they do something and it's like, "All right, I'm open for business." And like nobody cares. Like they need to know you, they need to trust you. And how a lot of that comes about is like by putting out like content. And it's an evolution. I'm like my you know, like my first few posts, and I think the funny thing is like my first, I don't know, 30 to 50 posts were like really just authentic to me. And I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna put out like stuff. And then what happens is then you start chasing like likes a little bit, right? And like it's okay to chase likes on a platform because they kind of help you grow, right? But then it's like at some point you gotta like find that, like you kind of said, like being a walking dichotomy of like stuff that is going to get you viewed by people that in a way that's helpful for your business and helpful for your message, but also is like authentic to you, right? Because there's a lot of people who put up like shit that's just like the algorithm is also based on just like pump this to people and it's not real, right? That's what I am always thinking about too.
Yeah, so I do like to jump in on this. A lot of people, I feel like people have a pretty superficial view of social media, and rightly so in a lot of cases. But as someone who's trying to educate, and this is also why I brought it up with, with that post yesterday. Like, I do get how there's an element of playing the game,
Yeah.
but another thing that I think is really important is communication as a skill
Yeah.
is a really valuable thing. Now, obviously, when we're providing a service to an in-person client, nobody really debates the fact that communication is important. What I would say is communication, especially past a certain level of experience, you really, if you learned nothing else about rehab or strength and conditioning ever again, you would still be successful at what you do, right? You know enough. Now, we love it, so we're going to continue to learn, right?
Hmm.
That's not really an option. But a lot of times when you have a patient or a client in front of you, whether or not those skills that you have, that knowledge that you have actually lands and succeeds with that person, unfortunately, for the way a lot of people view it, it all boils down to communication. And we've dealt with that at first, right? When you're a little less experienced, your ability to cue somebody, maybe you're so passionate about it and they just kind of do this sometimes. You bomb them with a ton of information that's not needed, their eyes gloss over, and now they're no longer taking in information. And we've experienced that in person, right? As soon as I
Hmm.
got out of school, I was like, I have all these things to share with people, and I had to show that I had knowledge. But my lack of communication skills or my lack of focus on those skills prevented me from really connecting with that person in front of me. Now, as a practitioner, that's something that we can all relate with. What I like to do is extend that to your social media presence. If you're presenting good info, but the way you're packaging it is a way that doesn't garner any views, any attention, you don't focus on the first few seconds of a video. You don't focus on that first impression that is very real. Like, why should that person listen to you? Why does that information apply to them? And I think a lot of these communication skills can be a very important thing for how your impact really translates to people online. Yes, there are the elements of likes and shares and whatever, and yeah, there is an element of playing that game, but what it really comes down to is communication. If you are an effective communicator across many different post formats, look at a post that's just written text. Do you have an initial line that makes people motivated to read through the rest of the post?
Yeah.
That's not frivolous. That's not superficial. That is human psychology. And I think when it comes to us sharing our expertise, can you package it in a way where somebody who doesn't take this seriously, someone who isn't, you know, going through PubMed all the time, are they willing to listen to what you have to say? So that's sort of the way that I frame it. And while not every post is designed to go viral, I do take some time, and after I make a post, let's say it's a talking head post, I look critically at my first 10 seconds and I
Hmm.
go, am I setting myself up to have people actually listen through to the rest of this message? And I think that stuff is important
Yeah.
because if we get better at holding somebody's attention, If you have expertise, you have more that you can teach them. If you
Yeah.
never get that person's attention in the first place, and again, it doesn't have to be unethical or not congruent with your overall message. It's just a matter of being a little bit creative, attempting to connect with people, just like you do in person, but through a slightly different medium. And I think that's true for newsletters. I think that's true for, you know, Facebook stuff, for Instagram and short form content, for long form content on YouTube. You got a 20-minute video, you've got some real expertise you're sharing. How do you take that first minute or two and convince people, hey, I got some really good stuff here. I know that it can help you. Let me explain how it's going to help you. I'll connect the dots for you so you're not left hanging. And then that convinces them, okay, this is worth watching all the way through. So I think when you frame it in terms of these communication skills, and that social media is just another medium for that communication, some really good things can happen. And I've even noticed how that affects my communication in person.
Hmm.
How do I get a client that I know they don't care about this stuff as much as me, but I also know that this nugget of information that I have can really positively impact their life. The only question remains, how do I package that nugget so that it lands appropriately and it has that positive effect? So yeah, I think oftentimes people, whether I know you didn't mean anything by it, but like the chasing the
Yeah.
likes,
No.
or however we want to say it's actually, I don't view it as like this superficial, empty endeavor. I think it's actually very important and it can allow us to be better practitioners ourselves.
I think you make a really good point, and I think because you have to be able to garner people's attention, right? Like that's that like to capture it in a way that's meaningful. I think what I mean is like what I see a lot of people who are like they're start beginning the game, right? Like they're starting and they're like, okay, like there is always I kind of always just made this like triangle in my brain of like there's informational that is like useful, right? Useful information. There's like an edge, there's an info or entertainment type of component, right? And then there's like me putting out like this message that like I want to put out in the way that I want to put out it, conveying like let's just say optimism, right? Like cuz let's be honest, like move you some of these people like they put out shit that just like scares people, right? Yeah, and they also use attention in ways that like are kind of like what I would be like, yeah, this is kind of bullshitty, but it gets people attracted. And I think your point is almost like, hey, if you want to use that for good, right? You got to know how to gain it. Otherwise, your message is falling on no ears, right? And so that's a really good point. And I think like that kind of remakes it. It helps me rethink. I need to do more talking head stuff. That's like one of the things I'm gonna start working on more. But like,
Bro, it's a skill.
dude, it
I'm
is.
telling you.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's why I've shied away from it, is because it's like I know I have to get a lot better at it, which is fine. That's the game, right? So,
For sure. And I mean, like you're doing an element of it here, but with something that's more longer form, we can sort of like approach a topic from multiple angles. When you try
yes.
to like distill it down to a minute and a half or 3 minutes, like how potent can you be with that?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's kind of funny. I meet at least twice a week with two friends of mine. They're pretty big names in jiu-jitsu. They have very large platforms, much larger than mine. But we film content together. We audit each other's content. We plan out like sales funnels, etc. It's a really valuable thing that we do a couple times a week. And it's funny, a while back, maybe a year ago now, I was like, guys, the spoken word is a superpower. There are
Hmm.
people, you look at some of these figures again, we could look at the actual meat of their content separately, but if you look at like the Gary V's, the Alex Hormozy type people off of nothing other than their skill in the spoken word. They're successful with whatever they jump into. That's why Hormozy could start off as a trainer and then go into business coaching. And then it doesn't matter. He's so good at presenting himself
Yeah.
verbally
Yeah.
that he can do that. And so I looked at some of my older talking head pieces and I'm like, man, I sound like an autistic robot. Like it was like I'm getting the information out there, and that's what I was so focused on. But I
Yeah.
was not focused at all on how it was packaged. And I'm like, man, it's funny. My fiance was actually the one, and I did not take it well at first. She's like, you don't talk online the way that you do in person. And I'm like, yeah, well, I'm trying to share information. Like she's like, yeah, I've heard you explain to clients before, and you don't sound like that. Like you
Yeah.
actually connect with them. And I'm like, it's crazy. So there was even a project that I did that March Madness of exercise this year.
Hmm.
It piled way more work on me than I needed. But the whole point was that I was going to force myself to do a bunch of talking heads, and they were all sort of in like newscast type format, right? I'm
Hmm.
presenting like one exercise versus another, go into a little bit of history, why it's useful, whatever, let people vote on it. And it forced me. I didn't I didn't do all of the matchups in that month as talking heads like I wanted to, but I did
Yeah.
do the majority of them. And yeah, I did like an additional 40 or so talking heads in 30 days. So I'm filming those plus my regular content and everything. And it just like, yeah, like anything else, any skill that you really hammer in a short amount of time, I really feel like I made leaps and bounds there. I'm not perfect at it. I don't think I have it as like a superpower yet, but it's crazy how you take a condensed amount of time like that, 1 month,
Yeah.
and you can get really good at something like that.
Yeah. I mean, when I started, it was just post every day. Like, and make a commitment to showing up every day. And some days, like it's a lot like training, and like we can debate we don't have to debate it, but like I think I want to talk to you more about like the training aspect of stuff, but it's the same thing. It's like you show up on your good days and you show up on your bad days, and doesn't mean on your bad days you're gonna be able to push through that shit. You just are like, hey, this is what this day is. Like you learn to ride that wave, right? Um, and yeah, I mean, like, again, there's a lot of it. Like, some days I'm just like, dude, just get it out. Where it's like, yes, you should spend 30 minutes to make this better, and like that's also part of it. And everybody's on their own adventure. Like, I think what you're talking about though with your friends and like that's really what it's about too. That's like it's like, hey, get feedback. We know that feedback is paramount to learning and skill acquisition, right? Well, that's what you're doing, right? And the Instagram in general is giving you feedback. Like that is another aspect of it, right?
Sure, and
So
it can be a pretty large sample size too, you know?
exactly, right? Like, which is really cool. It's like when we were off camera jokingly, I'm like, what a time to be alive, because we're just like I'm ripping a podcast from my basement while my kid's crying upstairs. I think you're either at an office or your gym or wherever you're at, but like you're in California, correct?
Yes, sir. I'm in San Diego. And yeah, I'm in the office. My gym is through that wall right there.
Yeah, I love it. God, I love San Diego too. Um, okay, so I want to go to one more of your like posts, just because this is like something near and dear to my heart, and it's complicated, but it's the Clay Matthews back pain post from like a week ago. Um, because what's so problematic to me is like and there is this. I actually was writing about it. I maybe put it in my post today. It's like somewhere we need to help people understand, but somewhere between it's all in your head and it's your body's jacked, there is this space that like pain occupies. And that post of Clay just being like, you hit 30 and your back goes to shit, and I could do more. Like he was actually, your point was like you were laying out what you should do, you're just not doing it, so you'd rather go get a surgery, right? And like,
And not only that, he was also saying like when he did that stuff, good things happened. Like from a PT standpoint,
yeah,
right? There are definitely scenarios where you work with somebody, you're doing everything right. I like to view it like they're taking just one step up the staircase, right? And there are scenarios in rehab where they're coming up the stairs, they're not trying to take 2 steps at a time, they're doing it right, appropriate pacing, whatever, and they fall down the stairs. You're like, okay, let's change our approach. You change some variables, maybe some exercise selection, maybe how you, and then they go up again and they fall down again. And in those scenarios, when we exhaust every option and we approach it from multiple angles, and you go, you know what, dude, this is out of our hands. You may need surgery. Like, I'm not trying to say that surgery never has a place. Like, obviously, there are scenarios where it is extremely necessary. But when I hear somebody saying that every time they do PT, things improve, and then that drops their motivation to continue with their training, and then they go to shit, that tells me, like, bro, you have the process laid out for you.
yeah,
And then, the fact that he gave that layup, like so many people view their body like a car. They
yeah,
want to go get a scan find out, just like you get that code on your check engine light and it says replace the alternator, you replace the alternator, car runs fine again. They view their body the same way, but I really think that that comes down to a matter of personal responsibility. They don't want it to be their responsibility. They
Yeah.
just like the car. Hey, oh, I'm not a mechanic. Oh, I bring it to the mechanic. Oh, I'm not a PT. I go to the PT or the ortho or whatever, and then they fix me.
Yep.
It's like, no, dude, you are spending 24 hours a day in that body. You
Yeah.
know it well. And like a good practitioner, they're gonna go off of the signals that you're getting. They're not gonna go, oh, okay, today's this day. On this day of the plan, you have to do this and diminish your what your body's telling you. They're gonna be like, man, how we feeling today? How did we
Yeah.
feel after that last session?
Yeah.
Did your back push back against us a little bit? Did you have a little bit of a flare up or did it handle that new exercise? Like all of it is always through the lens of that person. And I think the sooner we could get somebody on board to taking that responsibility and understanding that it's up to them and these other people are coming in and playing a small role. I don't know if that was, I don't, was that the post where I likened it to the Rubik's Cube?
I can't remember if there was a Rubik's Cube reference. It was like a week ago.
Okay, yeah.
Um,
So no, I know what push you're talking about, but this is an analogy I use all the time
yeah.
in person.
Yeah.
If you've got an injury, I view that injury as a Rubik's cube, and the person who's injured has to solve that Rubik's cube,
Yes.
right? Now, I don't want people overly scared, like, oh man, I don't want to make the wrong move with the Rubik's cube. No, make some moves. Don't make them super rapid fire where you do 30 things at once and you can't even evaluate what helped you and what didn't. Take a move, move the Rubik's cube around, look at it, make the next move. If you made a mistake, go back in the other direction. And if you find that you're not making progress on your own, maybe you briefly hand that Rubik's cube to a PT for a second, and that PT will do a couple moves that through their experience they know is in the right direction. But this is important. They then hand the Rubik's Cube back to you, and you have more work to do again. And
Yeah.
I view that process to be the same with surgery. Like if they're going in and cutting you up, they're not handing that Rubik's Cube back solved. Far from it, right? It's
Yeah.
just some moves in the right direction, but then they hand it back to you, and it is still up to you to continue to make those right moves. And I think when you view it like that, and I'm sure you've had patients that have very much assumed that responsibility. And when they come in to work with you, it's probably a dream because they're like, yeah, man, I've been trying this. My back seems like it can handle this type of motion, but it's a little bit intolerant this way. You're like, man, music to my ears,
Yeah.
you know, like,
Luckily, like so much of my content is oriented around that like it's kind of who is attracted to it, right? And like, I've had clients for long periods of time because they enjoy, well, enjoy and benefit from coaching. But like my whole model is not to create dependent people. It's like to help people just understand, like people just need a soundboard, right? They need like an external, like just somebody to help make decisions. And I even say to people, like I have a guy who's super strong guy, loves powerlifting, right? And he knows he's his own worst enemy. And I'm like here's the and he's kind of in that phase of like training has gone really good and we've been able to push really hard, and then these like moans and groans start popping up, and I'm like, dude, like, so here's what I know we probably need some reduction in overall workload or in some variation. And like what you got going on, like we gotta let it calm down. How exactly that looks, like I need you to help me figure that out, right? And the mind-boggling thing about like Clay Matthews in that post, right? And just like people in general is like, so the way I look at surgery, right? And surgery can have positive effects, right? But no matter what, it's a big ass spike in pain, right? Because like no matter what you do, you're cutting into a human being, right? It's also a forced rest period to some extent, right? Even if they get back to like training or whatever, there's a pretty big reduction in like stress imposed. Also, a lot of times psychological. Like I get to be off work for 6 weeks. I get to be off XYZ for a little while, right? And like again, I'm throwing in factors here, but I just have always looked at it like, yeah, it may. And I also, so one of the things you mentioned earlier, and we can get into this too, like when I was a trainer, I was also a nursing assistant at a hospital on a neurosurgery floor, and I would see people have laminectomies. That's when they go into your spine and they cut little pieces of your lamina out to give the nerve quote unquote more space. People would have repetitive laminectomies, and then they would have a fusion. And it was like these people, unfortunately, are just not strong. They're not fit. They're not healthy. They may get some relief, but then it's back. Because when you, like, the nature of pain is like when it comes back, it's like super fucking scary. It's like, what did I do wrong? Right.
Trauma
And
response.
dude, what?
It's a trauma response.
100%, right?
Yeah.
And that's where your point about like just the self-efficacy and like taking ownership of it, and it doesn't mean necessarily anything went wrong. It's just your body responding to stresses imposed, both physical and psychological, right? And like it I just, and again, somebody like Clay Matthews, like you were a freaking incredible, well, pretty good linebacker. I'm a Packers fan. I like Clay Matthews, but like you were like
I think he was incredible, dude.
he was
Look,
incredible. He could hit people so hard.
so I don't know if you can see, but I'm a Jets fan. So talking about any Packers is still a
That's
little
rough.
bit,
Sorry. I like Aaron Rodgers even though he's a crazy person, so I apologize.
but yeah, I mean, I think even talking, you sort of touched on this briefly, but I'd like to go back to it. You know, the like forced load management that comes from a surgery, right? I mean, part of that is why you see these studies where they do like sham surgeries. I think
Yeah.
there's like a pretty large one on like meniscus.
Yep.
Like they do a sham surgery, and just that forced load management and everything that accompanies the change in mindset when you sort of outsource the decision making to like, oh,
Yes.
had surgery, gonna have to rest it, gonna
Yep.
have to ramp back up slowly. All of a sudden, all the things that they could have been doing initially, they're forced
Yes.
into, and everyone
Yes.
accepts it at that point because, oh, I had surgery. But it's like, where was the attempt at that before surgery? Where was the attempt at, okay, going to decrease total workload, going to manage life stressors, going to slowly ease my way back into it? Like a lot of those things don't happen until the event that forces it. And I think you look at these guys who are, who through their young life work through structured athletics for a long time. I actually see this pretty commonly with former athletes. Like the higher the level, the more commonly I see this where they're used to this rigid structure. Hey,
Yeah.
this is the off season. This is what we do in the off season. Oh, it's training camp. This is how we approach it here. Everything's regimented, controlled. They don't have any real autonomy in terms of like, oh, I want to train today, but not tomorrow, or like all that decision making is gone. So it's kind of human nature that after that structure is gone, you sort of let the pendulum swing in the other direction.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so many people are just there were a good number of people who commented on that post who were like, "Oh, well, an elite athlete probably has something wrong with their body from pushing the limits." And it's not that that's wrong. You're just looking at the physical side of
Yeah.
chasing that performance, but the mental side is very present as well. And some guys, you see James Harrison, and he maintains that structure after the fact. You know that,
Dude. Yeah.
man, that guy, when he was lifting with the team, I bet his strength coach was probably the brakes far more often
Oh
than he was
yeah.
the gas.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to tell James Harrison to go. But
Yeah.
there are some guys where that's not their tendency, and the rate at which that they have to train and everything else exceeds their natural tendencies.
Yeah.
So afterwards, they want to do everything but that. They want to go hunting. They want to go do all these different things that they couldn't do as a
Yeah.
part of that structure. So yeah, and then, they get something that scares them a little bit, like a bout of really bad back pain, and all of a sudden they're back to it. They're like, all right, I'm that motivated guy again. And then all of a sudden they get their quality of life just back to livable to where they're like, oh man, I could go hunting again. I could go do whatever.
Yeah.
And then boom, they deviate from it. So I think that is also something that a lot of people are kind of overlooking as it relates to those guys. They're like, oh, what? They should know what it's like to train. Yeah, exactly. They actually
It-
know that so well
yeah.
that now they're swinging away from it.
Well, it's one of my favorite anecdotes is okay. So even the definition of pain is it's a experience. Pain is an experience, right? We don't think about it that way. Like we most people don't. I think if you're learned in this stuff, you start to understand. Okay, nociception is free nerve endings detecting some form of stimuli that we perceive as threat, or it's chemical in nature, or structural, or whatever. But then pain is like really simply put nociception plus our interpretation of that nociception, right? So you have a guy who literally will get smashed by another 300-pound human, and have pain associated with that and get right back up, right? Whereas if they're at home and they sneeze and rotate weird and they have the same pain, their brain could latch onto that and hang on to it for a long time, right? Like I do think a lot of it, and the reason I really think the main benefit of like activity for people is it gives your body a new experience in a short like oh, so you're having back pain with that deadlift. Okay, well let's do something similar, but it takes you psychologically through like that, what we'd maybe call exposure, and then maybe grades the exercise to the tissue as well. Maybe when you're doing an RDL, hopefully you're a little bit more into your hips and a little less into your back, right? So like we just deload it a little bit, right? And you can also like people like act like you can't just lower the weight. Like it's like, or you can't change range. It's like, you can like just deadlift. Like so many dudes like that at this one gym that I worked at, it would be like a guy and a girl, and like husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend. And the girls were always awesome because they just kind of were like, they would just go do it and like they would, choose appropriate weights. And the guys would always come in and like, you're just, this looks like crap. Like, and I'm not saying it was bad. It was like you're forcing it in this early stage to impress your girlfriend, right? And it was then like they were always the ones kind of blown up, right? And it's like, yeah, because you just have to be okay with taking what's there. Doesn't mean you can't blow yourself up and come back from it. It's just like, what do you expect here, right? And
Right.
I always just thought that was funny. Observationally, I just always thought it was funny. Like, yeah, just take what's there, dude. And I was the same. Like, for a long time, like, when I would deadlift, it looked like a pooping dog. And it actually probably is the reason that, like, I've never really messed up my back, is because, like, I shoveled a lot of shit growing up as a kid in the Midwest. And I deadlifted like a pooping dog for like 9 years, right? So,
Hell yeah.
and it's fine, right? And I'm getting more into Jefferson work and Zerchers. I love Zerchers. Dude, you're a stud at that stuff. I'm like, I am impressed. So I'll give you some kudos there, but um let's get into training, jujitsu and combatives. As somebody from Iowa who I appreciate wrestlers, but I never wrestled. And I went to a gym, BJJ gym for a year with a bunch of wrestlers and got my ass kicked. But like, how do you balance good strength and I like in principle I know this, but for the audience and like you're somebody who works with a lot of grapplers, how do you manage like the stresses of the sport and the weight room, and like how do you make them mutually beneficial?
Yeah, first and foremost, especially when you're working with like a professional grappler, they're already pushing their body to its physical limits, right? So, I guess the the shortest answer is as best I can.
Yeah.
It's not going to be perfect, but
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are unaware of how little volume you can do if you dose that volume appropriately, if it's at an appropriate intensity to get the desired result, and manage fatigue. And, managing fatigue, especially in today's optimal crowd, gets its own bad rap. Look, if you're a bodybuilder, I think your uh, need to manage fatigue is orders of magnitude lower than someone who 3 hours after your lifting session is going to be fighting other humans again,
Yeah.
right? Like it, and having like, jujitsu is an art of like destroying anatomy.
Yeah.
So if we're overly fatigued, your ability to not have your anatomy destroyed is diminished. So fatigue management is huge. Being able to uh, get that above that threshold of intensity, but manage total volume, get them out of the mindset of like, oh, my strength sessions need to feel like my sessions on the mat. No, they
Yeah.
don't. We're looking for different adaptations. I want this to complement your jujitsu. I don't want it to compete with your jujitsu.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. Another thing that I really hammer with them is jiu-jitsu is a sport that doesn't really have a true off season. So what I get them to buy in with instead is, and we're currently in this phase right now. World Championships for the gi were 2 weekends ago, and so what I like to do with them, since we don't have a true off season, after their big tournaments, I've got like a 2 month window where, sure, it's not an off season, but they don't have any huge tournaments on the horizon. So I take them, I go, all right, it's the 2 months after that big tournament. Now is our phase where we're really going to prioritize our strength work. We're going to try to make those improvements now so that once you're in camp, and this is tough because when they're in camp, they're super focused, super motivated. And now is when they want to hit their PRs, they want
Yeah.
to outperform their prior selves. And especially when I have them for longer durations of time, this is something that I plant as a seed early. And whether or not they get on board with me right off the bat, eventually it will make sense to them.
Yeah.
Where now they don't have these crazy competition class schedules beating the crap out of them. And PRs are going to sort of come along anyways. And I just lean into that a little bit more. I go, hey, now is the time for us to push. And with the ones who do it really well, those 2-ish months after a big competition, we really push for progress and adaptation. What do you know? A lot of those guys also were just managing and cutting weight before that, and now maybe they're a little bit
Food.
more loose with it. So there's a bunch of reasons why it,
Yeah.
it's obvious to them that they're like, all right, now is when we push. And
Yeah.
then if we've done that when there aren't these really high pressure competitions on the horizon, as soon as they get into that point, I go, hey, we did the work in the weight room. Now what we're going to do is we're going to drop our volume a little bit more. We're going to make sure, I pull out a lot of like the drop sets and the things that are extra fatiguing, and we
Yep.
just hit our straight sets, and we focus on an appropriate effort level, etc. That gets them more bought in to where in camp they beat themselves up less in the weight room. They feel better on the mats.
Yeah.
And I just try to get them bought into that big picture when as an athlete, all you're focusing on is that goal that's 4 weeks out or 8 weeks out,
Yeah.
right? I get
Yeah.
them to focus on the big picture. Hey, we're competing at Worlds in 5 weeks or whatever, right? And they're like, man, I want to go up from where my deadlift was last week. And I'm like, yeah, I know you do. And honestly, we just don't have to right now.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like even match it. Like something that I get them to do in camp is I'm like, match that deadlift PR, but let's just hit it a little bit faster.
Yeah.
Let's have the
Yeah.
bar be a little bit snappier. And then we're leaving some in the tank. You're still training hard on the mats. And then after the Worlds or whatever, I'm like, bro, let's crush that deadlift number now. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. What's really resonating with me in a lot of ways is stuff that I like learned 10 to 15 years ago that I like seemed good, and then I just kept chasing the newer shit that came out. Like, I mean, 531 arguably like was like a game change. Like I was in the CrossFit world when like Ripito came in, and then it was like Jim Wendler, like everybody was doing 531, and like 531's a pretty awesome program when you just consider the fact that like what a lot of it is like just kind of make it easy. Like, just don't beat the shit out of yourself and try to make it easy, right? And finally, at 36, after having a kid, I'm like, dude, just show up and like let it be easy. And like, it's funny because I'm actually like allowing myself to adapt, right? And I've made a lot of progress. I'm probably like, I grew up playing soccer and I played football, but I was mostly like, and I ran a lot. Running was like what I just could do easily, right? And then so getting strong, and I like the other good part about, and like I'm honestly just trying to be the coach that I needed, because like 15 or 16-year-old Dave was like doing like garbage lifts when it's like, dude, just squat to a box. Just squat to a box, man. And just like bench press, and it can be light. You don't have to like throw 135 on just because your buddy over there who's stronger than you is doing it. Like, do some good work. But it's funny because yeah, like when you just manipulate that variable, okay, like let's just try to hit the same thing you did last week, but make it a little easier. Or or even just add a rep. And like sometimes like yeah, you did it for 225 for 3 last week. If you can put one more rep up, and then you're like, cool, you get a psychological win, but you're not beating the shit out of yourself. Like, and that, because that's what I just overarchingly see is like people, they just the rung levels up a little bit, and they think, okay, I got to do that again immediately, right? And it's like, no, you don't. Like, especially when you're juggling multiple things, which a lot of people in our day and age are. When it comes to navigating injury, it with like combatives and stuff, like what are the big things that you try to communicate to people navigating like grappling oriented injuries or stuff like that?
Yeah. Well, actually, real quick before I dive into that,
Yeah.
531, I did a modified 531 with some of it was almost 10 years ago to the day when I started working with some of my like super high level jiu-jitsu athletes
Hmm.
when I moved out to San Diego. I started with a modified 5-3-1 because, like you, I found a ton of value in it. Super simple. What I will say is I very quickly got away from it with fighters purely because AMRAPs, they
Yeah.
will, one, their ability for like muscular endurance is already very
Super high.
good.
Yeah.
And if you're telling them like, hey, here, get as many as you can, like I found very quickly, I'm like, oh man, these guys will hurt themselves
Yeah. That's a good point.
will
Yeah.
and so I very quickly, not that it's a bad program, I think
No.
it's great, but with this level of specifically combat sport athletes, if you just give them a for like, man, same thing, if I go to even just a concept 2 rower and I'm like, all right, here we're going to do an assessment that I've used in the past is like 1,000 meters for time. These guys will incapacitate themselves
Yeah.
with the effort level that they put into that.
Yeah.
The second that you're like, hey, we're gonna go as hard as we can, they're like, a light turns on, and they're like, oh yeah. And I'm like,
Yeah.
whoa, 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 hold on. Like, we can
Yeah.
go hard, but not kill ourselves. Anyways, so yeah, navigating injury. Well, it's a constant, right? And I think the biggest thing in combat sports, specifically jujitsu, which has such crazy high training volumes. Um, Something that'll play into this. I think a lot of other combat sports, ones that much more regularly involve trauma to the head, force them to be much more selective with sparring.
Mm.
But because jujitsu doesn't, you can get away with way, way, way more sparring on a weekly and monthly basis. And there will be more peripheral things that start to accumulate and add up, but there isn't an immediate pushback. Like if an MMA camp was like, all right, we're going to do full contact sparring 4 days a week, your guys would be dropping like flies,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, you can be kind of irresponsible with your overall training load in jujitsu, and the drawbacks are not as immediately obvious. And a lot of top level gyms are essentially meat grinders. It's kind of like the Bulgarian weightlifting
Yeah.
where sure, if you like on average, you take the Bulgarian weightlifting protocol and you have somebody run it and you have an N size of 1, they will get hurt.
Yeah.
And they will not. But if you have a massive pool of people to pull from, the survivorship bias, like some people will survive it, and the people who survive it are going to be fucking animals. And
Exactly.
I think you see like a lot of the top jujitsu gyms are kind of the same thing right now, where like N size of 1, they're going to get messed up in camp. But as a school or an
Yeah. Yeah.
academy,
Yeah.
like the survivorship bias, you're going to bring a couple dudes to worlds that are,
Yeah.
mostly healthy, and those guys are going to mess people up. So with injuries, what I try to focus on, I think a lot of combat athletes, the biggest thing they do is they mismanage the acute phase of injury for something that is relatively minor.
Yeah.
And when they mismanage that acute phase, they re-injure it. It goes from being minor to an extremely preventable major injury. And
Yep.
that's sort of the realm that I focus on, right? Freak things are going to happen.
Yep.
Like there's no, we're doing our high load exercises. We're trying to improve tissue quality as best we can. Who knows? Maybe that mitigates or prevents some of those major freak things, right? There's no real way to quantify that. But there are, and something that I have them do is reflect when we have mismanaged a relatively minor injury. I'm like,
Mm.
hey, you know, I know it's not a perfect scale, but that 4 to 14 days for like the acute phase of many injuries. I just use that one for them. I'm like, hey, I want you to really be aware of this for the next 2 weeks,
Yeah.
right? I simplify it for them. Obviously, there's some wiggle room there depending on the tissue that's injured, whatever. But if I can just get them bought in on 2 weeks, we're focusing on it. If there are relevant things in the weight room, immediately they want to just load it more. They're like, give me special exercises for this.
Yeah.
Give me, and I'm like, okay, let's slow down. The first thing that we want to do is just manage stress or mitigate additional risk to where in the first 2 weeks something can make this way, way worse.
Yeah.
Then, if we survive that first 2 weeks, and you've still got this issue that's sort of plaguing you, but maybe we're more outside of that acute phase, that's when I'm like, okay, let's see if we can do some, low grade, more directed movements to help coax things along. But really, that stuff I think is extremely like tertiary. It's not my main focus is like how do I get them bought in on taking these next 2 weeks seriously and just limiting their risk or limiting total stress on this region so we don't turn something that doesn't have to be a big deal into like a career altering injury because that actually happens a lot. The
dude.
amount of times
Yeah,
even you look at the category of those freak uh injuries. Sure, there might have been an injury regardless, but when that happens to something that has been nagging and sort of
yeah.
hanging around, then all of a sudden it goes from something that could have been, a more moderate type injury, and it's extremely severe.
I know acute to chronic workload theory is like there's flaws in it and stuff, but like the acute to the like okay, the acute workload of somebody combined with an acute, relatively small injury, that your frame is like awesome, and I appreciate how you said it that way because it is like yeah, like let's think about this. Like we could either really manage this well for like 2 weeks and it could get a lot better because we got it better, feeling good, and then we start to load it up appropriately, or we could just be like, let's just kind of like I do think like you have to load, and even like your groin injury, you're back to, and it's a little different of a game too because that was kind of like an acute thing that muscular strain pop, like that shit sucks, but a lot of times it's just like all right, well let's like reacclimatize to it, right? But like when you're on the mats and it's unpredictable, that type like when people are on there in that environment, it's unpredictable. Like that's just in my year of doing jujitsu, and I really jacked up my knee. I didn't really jack up my knee. I like definitely like popped my MCL and like hurt my meniscus. And the problem here, dude, is I'm competitive enough that I would do stupid shit with guys that were really good. And they were often like wrestlers that were still like blue belts. So like I was like, yeah, okay, I can kind of, and I was like strong, but I was an idiot. And like that's how I just kept, and I would go 3 days a week. And this gym, it's kind of what you described. Like their mentality is we're gonna spar pretty hard for 30 minutes. And I'm like, and I what I've kind of just thought if I'm gonna go back and do jujitsu again is like I don't know how to manage that in that gym maybe, and maybe I need to find a different place to train a little bit. Because that's kind of the nature of the game there. Like you might have to go somewhere else where it's more technical and
Or
whatnot,
or
right?
blend it. Like, what
Yeah,
so let me tell you this. If you felt like it was a meat grinder with 30 minutes of sparring,
yeah.
there are places that, especially their comp classes, are 2+ hours
Oh
of
my God.
sparring. Yeah. So like, what I try to do now that I'm managing, I've been training now for 20 years. There were times where I was competing full time. I was going to every comp class. I'm not there anymore, right?
Yeah,
And so what I do lately, I've been training an average of about 2 days a week. One day a week, I will go to that gym there and get those harder rounds, and that's my objective for that day or for that session. And then the other one, I have mats at my gym here, and I grab a trusted training partner, and we do certain situations to focus on the skill acquisition side where like that day if I had to lift afterwards, I would still have like fatigue
yeah,
would be so low that I could lift right after that. And
yeah,
and those that for me, like we're really hitting skill acquisition. I am still doing a lot of those things under like competition type speeds when I'm doing the more intense stuff over there. I'm also getting a good amount of training volume. Those days I'm normally like, all right, the next day, like my lift is either not happening or it's like, I'm cutting way, way back.
yeah.
But yeah, you got to find that balance for
That's
it.
kind of what I'm learning, and I've even just gotten a feel for a few different gyms where like you can it's just that gym also is ran by a guy who was a former hockey, no, he was a former collegiate wrestler, but like I'm in Iowa City, like so this is wrestling mecca, right? And there's like I got my ass kicked by literally like a national champion. And I'm like, oh, okay, like, and it was cool, but I was like, also like, I'm not really learning that much other than don't fuck with wrestlers or BJJ.
Plus, wrestlers bring an intensity that you don't even see in jujitsu all that often.
Dude, they're wild. So I got like a couple minutes and then I got to hop to another call, not another podcast, but another call. But all right, man, you said you're a new dad, 9 months.
9 months.
What's changed for you, if anything?
Um, I'd say the biggest thing like is I used to be able to, if I really like punished my sleep cycle for a day or 2 days or whatever, I could bank on that next day being a catch-up day. And I've learned now very painfully, repeatedly, that when you bank on that day, what do you know? That's the day that he spikes a fever or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So just trying not to uh not even trying to get away with that as much, right?
Yeah.
Like not letting myself burn the candle at both ends. Just being a little bit more responsible with that stuff. Uh, yeah, I think that's the biggest thing where like the unpredictability of sleep forces me to like I really second guess it. If I'm like planning on like, if I've got something that's gonna push back on my sleep and when I get to bed, I know that next morning sleeping in is not an option because he's gonna get up when he gets up. And so as I'm pushing, I'm like, man, can I move things around so this doesn't happen? Really prioritizing that because yeah, the chronic sleeplessness that happened early on, and then different things where like with work or whatever, I would sort of punish that sleep cycle and be like, all right, I'll catch up tomorrow. And then tomorrow happens and you're not catching up, and then you're like, all right, tomorrow, and then that day happens and you're not catching up. Just being a bit more proactive with sleep and recovery.
I just always fundamentally kind of go back to it. It's like the thing that we weirdly have made about it's we're anxious about it. We know we need it. Like I don't know if the data was really that good, but like literally like in the 1920s, people were sleeping like an average of 9+ hours a night, right? Like you would actually go to sleep when it was dark and wake up when it was and like now it's like 6 to 7 and like a lot of people just struggle with it. And then when it goes bad, people get anxious about it and it goes even worse, right? And so yeah, we've been pretty fortunate that our little guy sleeps pretty good, but there's just the early phase there was tough, and but the training goes on. Like that's what some I've had a few guys like, how are you getting like your stuff? And it's like I have a garage gym. Like I just go fucking hit 20 minutes if I have to, right? It helps me feel good to show up for the kid and my wife, right? So yeah,
For sure. Yeah, the first 4 weeks afterwards, I was not having good sessions, but just kept plugging away. And it's crazy. Then 2 months after that were maybe the best 2 months of training that I've had in almost a decade. It was crazy. And what I try to remind myself is those 2 months would not have been possible
yeah,
if for those first 4 weeks I wasn't just doing what I
yeah,
could.
yeah,
Right? Like if I fell off entirely the first whole month of that 2 month stretch would have just been like getting back up to speed, you
yep,
know? So yeah, that's definitely like a lesson that I try to impose on clients too. If we can only come in and hit two exercises, but hit them with a degree of intent and focus, right? And you've got to then skip out after that. Man, we moved the needle in the right direction that day. We kept ourselves on track. That is a win. People view it as an L if they can't finish their whole session or
dude.
man, you showed up that day, you did some stuff, you were forward facing with it, and even if it's not that day, that will reflect on the next day where you can push more into it, you know?
100%. I love that mentality too. Well, a buddy of mine, well, he's a client now too, but he's like, just I got to stack days. I'm like, yeah, dude, and do what you can in those little bits. So, Alex Sterner, man, I appreciate you so much. Where can people find you?
Alex Sterner on Instagram. Electrum Performance is also my business on Instagram, and then that's also my YouTube channel.
Love it. Hey, appreciate you. Have fun out there. Peace.
Well, it was great talking to you.
Good to talk to you. Peace.